Hello all, and welcome to our webinar today. Thanks for joining us. We're going to do a review of the 2020 ERP report. My name is Chris DeVault. I'm the Director of Industry Relations with Panorama Consulting Group, and I'm here with Vanessa Davison.
Hello, everybody. My name is Vanessa Davison. I'm Managing Director of Panorama Consulting. Welcome to our webinar today.
We're excited to go down through today's details and share our information with you. Very comprehensive report with, and deep information from our clients and respondents. Probably the best report we have to date. As with most of our webinars, we're offering a free hour of consulting, so please stay tuned. Towards the end of our webinar, we'll give you some details on how to go to our website and attain that free hour of consulting with one or two of our professionals. What we're going to do today is a brief introduction of Panorama Group. We're going to look at the respondents and overview of what types of groups, what size, and what industries are responding to our ERP report. And then we're going to take a deep dive into the data and give some opinions of what we think it looks like, and also sprinkle in some experiences of our clientele and our consultants as they are in the industry. We're going to wrap up with a few questions. So a little bit about Panorama. You can see on the left-hand side here we are a full management consulting firm. We specialize in creating digital strategy, technology assessments. Our bread and butter has always been ERP selection. We offer implementation services on top of the ERP selection, change management, process management. And you can see the rest down the line. All of these experiences really adds to our knowledge that we are able to portray to our clients.
And it's also a great way our report was data driven by many respondents, but it's also as our delivery team is comprised of industry folk that have experience leading operations, finance, IT, supply chain in many different industries. So the report is also backed up by boots on the ground experience and analysis.
You can see here that we've got our industries that we specialize in, and then a little bit about the Panorama folks, just our global base of consultants and headquartered here in Denver, Colorado. We've got strong ERP experienced people that are Lean Six Sigma. We have MBAs. We have project management people, and we have people that are certified in Apex as well. We also have our own methodology internally for our consulting team to be consistent across the board in our delivery.
As you can see, we have served many clients globally in an array of industries and also governments and municipalities. And you can pretty much see the breadth of experience that we bring to our ERP report.
This is a quick snapshot of the vendors that Panorama commonly works with. You can see here that manufacturing, distribution, supply chain management, human capital, and other vendors and functionality there as well. This gives us a lot of experience. We also are exposed to Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 vendors. We're going to take a little quick look at who the respondents were. All right, the purpose of today's webinar and our ERP report is to really dive into our survey respondents, our research, and what our clients' experiences are. We're providing an overview of trends for ERP projects and digital transformations, and we're trying to share some key strategical steps in the beginning of those projects that will help our clients and other groups going through digital transformation help them start off their projects in a more successful manner.
So as you can see the respondent overview here, and keep in mind that the report investigates ERP trends across industries, organization sizes, and geographic locations. It really summarizes the research into each organization's selection and implementation decisions and their project results. So you can see that the data collection timeframe is from June to December 2019. We had 181 total respondents. The average annual revenue is 1.9 billion. The average number of employees, 7,243. Average number of software licenses purchased, 482. Percentage of multinational organizations was 48%. 47% of those were organizations that have completed implementations, and the average time to go live was 8 months. As you can see, many industries are represented in this report. You can see that the leading industry is still manufacturing, which is pretty much in line with our last year's report. IT also is 14.85, which is also in line with last year's report. The interesting thing is professional and financial services is a little bit lower, but still, I would say the third largest industry implementing enterprise systems. And you can see the other sectors that were represented in this report.
All right, so now we'll take a deep dive and a closer look at what the respondents and the data actually shows us. So what we see is, we certainly see an increase of companies replacing their legacy software. So we have a small handful of systems that we've noted below here that are sunsetting, but I would say there's so many different paths of software system retirement and sunsetting, that encompasses so many different situations. For example, we've got Oracle EBS, which has, been revamped into the cloud, but eventually their on-premise EBS, will be sunset and stop supporting, at some point here in time. Same with SAP's ECC, and we've got some dates that are thrown out there, and we do see some movement certainly from these groups that have, implemented ECC in a recent time frame. And we've got some Infor, we've got some Microsoft applications as well. Of course, there are new versions, and they've been rebranded by many of these different vendors, but there are all sorts of legacy software systems that are set to sunset, versions this year and throughout. That certainly are leading groups to make this decision of trying to select new software systems. From an ERP selection standpoint, we do see an influx of the private sector and public sector using outside consulting to help them leverage their internal knowledge and their, kind of their project to date. So we can't emphasize the importance of outside consultants and how they can help, from analyzing RFPs that are derived and based from a group's certain requirements. Groups like us help construct TCOs. These TCOs, when you really look at a 5-year total cost of ownership from a vendor and you look at a total 5-year cost of ownership from Panorama Group, we've certainly got some more encompassing all-in type of data. So groups like us really take a third eye at these implementations, are really looking at giving our clients a better feel for what the cost is really going to look like, not necessarily what the vendor is telling them. And then most importantly, independent ERP consultants can provide some truly unbiased recommendations. And that's very important, to get unbiased recommendations as you're going down this process, because once you peel back the onion on most of the firms out there, usually they are tied in one way or another to a vendor or to a software.
And I think, Chris, too, I think outside help, especially consulting firms in this space, being able to deploy a well-defined and tested methodology that allows for the formalization, so to speak, of the process. And that's important because in a lot of the cases we've seen where implementations have failed, we see that a lot of the errors were in the beginning of the process, where certain requirements were not met because requirements were not gathered thoroughly. Also, there was a lot of issues with identifying certain processes in the organization. So it's important to get that outside help to really deploy best practices in software selection.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. And as we jump into the data here, we wanted to set some precedents around, our terminology about Tier 1, enterprise, large organization, Tier 1 versus Tier 2, and versus Tier 3 here. So just as a, quick level set here, we see Tier 1 software applications such as SAP, S4, and we have S4 HANA, and we have Oracle. We also have N4. We have Microsoft as well in that kind of lower Tier 1 space. But these are really companies that are geared and marketed towards $750 million and above. Now, we don't necessarily always tie your tier ranking to revenue. There could be a lot of complexity that goes along with a Tier 2 company that maybe that makes them kind of have the complexity of a larger enterprise or a larger organization. So it's not just revenue, it's just not employee size, but we do want to put some definitions around these. We've got upper Tier 2. These vendors are serving the market from 250 million up to 750 million type clientele. And then you've got the lower Tier 2 market, which serves that 10 million to 250 million. Some examples there of upper Tier 2, again, we talked about Microsoft being there, IFS, Sage, and we've got some examples of lower Tier 2 companies, such as maybe an N4 or NetSuite and Avis, those type of applications there. Now, from an implementation approach, going from the old system and transitioning into the new system, we certainly see all sorts of different approaches, but a majority here of the respondents have taken a hybrid approach. So really, when you talk about traditional big bang approach, maybe you're looking at deploying the software in a big bang, meaning all functional areas. Maybe this means all organizations, all locations are taking on certain aspects of that system at that time as well. A phased approach by module, so we have maybe more locations that are taking on just finances, and maybe they're adding on operations, maybe they're adding on additional functionality after their initial phase. But that's kind of the breakdown of the hybrid versus the big bang and the phased approach. Certainly what we're seeing from our clientele is that hybrid approach, where maybe you take a set of locations that are somewhat similar, pretty similar in what they do, say process manufacturing, and you take 3 of the locations live, and then you have another set of locations that maybe do more distribution, but they have more common functionality in a different way, and then we're kind of looking at that as a hybrid approach. So we're certainly seeing that from our clientele, and I think the respondents also led to that as well in the ERP report. Now, making the transition to the cloud, of course, it's very important to understand what the cloud is, and cloud subscription models versus a true software as a service and multi-tenancy. But obviously, there's a huge shift to the cloud in general. So we saw that more than half the organizations that were selecting software are going into the cloud instead of the traditional, perpetual on-premise license. Seen many mid-sized manufacturers that are running their legacy systems move to the cloud to find a lower total cost of ownership. So depending on what your IT structure is, depending on how you plan to support and enhance the software and your level of self-sufficiency, we do certainly see the cloud offerings as a cost benefit to most of our organizations. I think the data showed that here as well. When you are trying to weigh those costs between a hosted, let's say a hosted and managed perpetual license versus a true SaaS multi-tenant model, there's certainly different criteria that come into play. Such as with a SaaS model, you have a little less control over updates and enhancements, but that plays into many companies' IT strategy. So over time, those costs are going to be a little higher, but if you're expecting that, and you can plan for that. On the other side, if you do get a perpetual license and have that hosted and managed. Typically, the cost may be a little bit more upfront because you may have to put some more resources into actually managing the software. But in the long run, you do have more flexibility and you have more control over those updates and that ability to be self-sufficient. So again, we don't see differentiating lines one way or another. You just have to have those expectations properly set. All right, and from a strategic alignment standpoint, we've got a lot of good feedback, not only from the respondents, but with our boots on the ground experience, and have Vanessa touch on some of these points from a strategic standpoint.
So oftentimes we find that an ERP initiative is an IT initiative, and it's not properly aligned with the overall corporate strategy or the different business units. So we often find that we need to kind of shepherd or help the under the C-suite identify what their overall corporate objectives are and really understand those goals and outline how that is supported by technology. So going into an ERP initiative, you really need to ask yourself, what are the benefits? What is the benefit realization going to be? Do you want better reporting and visibility benefits? Do you want operational efficiency benefits? Do you need to grow and have competition benefits? And also, what are the technology benefits? So having a clear alignment with the overall corporate strategy is important. People and processes must also support this defined strategy. I mean, a lot of organizations just really involve some of the core team and most of the IT department, but they forget about the people and process. It's interesting how we hear some organizations say, no, we're just going to focus on picking the software first, and then we will align our processes to what the software best practices are. So a lot of people forget that processes really need to be looked at first, and mobilizing people and redeploying them to utilize those new digital tools will also be very important. We call this, let's digitize your people, let's digitize your processes so that you can have those benefits. We also look at having that foundation in order to, like I said, realize the benefits of your implementation of your new system. And finally, we also talk about executive involvement, and that's really important in ensuring that this doesn't become just a technology project, but it aligns to the overall strategy. So the point is, strategic alignment is very important since it affects your workforce and the way they work. And so executives across all business units really need to be driving this. And I'll give you a quick example of how it can impact a shop worker. We had a client where, well, actually most of our manufacturing clients have an aging workforce. And a lot of people are used to having their spreadsheets and checking things off in the shop floor. When we deploy new digital tools, the way they do that work will change. They may have a mobile device that is scanning things instead of you having this spreadsheet checking things off. So trying to train an aging workforce with new digital technology, it can also slow down your implementation benefits. So keep that in mind, that you have to be able to align strategy, people, processes, and technology drives all that.
And I would add to what we've seen, especially recently, if you don't have that alignment, prior to the project, you're starting to set yourself up for delays and extra costs during that implementation. So it's always best when you have a chosen vendor coming in to really have full alignment of people, processes, and technologies before they start the pre-implementation work.
So continuing strategic alignment, the key technical intangibles that we like to touch on today is data conversion, change management, and pre-implementation aspect is data conversion. Specifically, I think data ownership. And having clear business processes will help in clearly identifying process and data owners. Because data strategies are important in an ERP implementation, we actually start this task during selection by clearly mapping out processes, so we help organizations identify that data ownership. And by having that data ownership, you actually have more data accuracy and accountability throughout the organization. The second thing we talk about is change management, and you're probably going to hear this throughout our whole ERP report. We've seen more and more people actually invest more in change management, which we'll talk about later in this report. But bear in mind, OCM is not the fluffy thing you do to get everyone on board. One of the CEOs said to me, yeah, we don't want to be sitting around in a circle and singing Kumbaya. And it's actually more about mobilizing your workforce and creating a successful workforce transition. The buy-in and the workforce transition is important because you have to make sure that workforce is also trained and ready to be deployed on the system on day one. So that's what OCM really enables you to do, is just to be able to go live with the least amount of issues as possible. And, when we get to that pre-implementation planning, a lot of people go, well, what's pre-implementation planning? Well, a lot of people actually roll into an implementation at design. And a lot of things should be done before that design phase, which we call in pre-implementation planning. It's just basically the pause after your software selection that, it's basically evaluating that all systems of an organization is a go. So we just go through the whole life cycle planning, making sure everybody understands how the digital strategy is supporting the corporate strategy, make sure all the processes are documented. We've evaluated your workforce impact, negotiated a good price and a good path forward with the vendor. And it's basically now it's time to get your core team identified and ready to go. So that's kind of what goes into pre-implementation planning. And the reason why this phase is important is because on day one of your implementation of design phase, your clock starts ticking. Your meter starts running with your software vendor. And that is a lot of money to spend while you're still getting your house in order.
All right, then from a people and process standpoint, the business process management, very important to understand from a pre-implementation standpoint and then going into design as well. So often our clients are looking to us and trying to figure out how do we standardize across the board, what are the best practices as well. So we go in and we're doing current state requirements. We're also doing future state suggestions, but we do want to start to implement best practices even before we start that design phase, because those things certainly will help make the design phase and implementation more efficient when you're already looking at some best practices. We have to look how that aligns with the system and the functional areas within each of those. The first exercise a vendor is going to come in and do is basically put up some process maps and figure out how your group differs from that. So if we can already have some of those answers, some of those questions already answered, that provides a very focused, more of a focus in design and allows us to get decisions made quicker. And then again, ERP vendors are always touting their best practices, but we really need to figure out how do we match up with their best practices, and then what do we need to do if we don't.
Yeah, and one thing that I'd like to add too is, we do get a lot of our clients saying, well, no, we're not going to focus on process because once we select the software, we'll just apply the software best practice. Well, oftentimes we find that it's not that easy, and also, a lot of the systems can be configured to your business process without having to customize. So don't spend all this time following the vendor and then realizing that you just wiped out some of your special or secret sauce in the way that you do things. Most of our companies, we end up coming into an implementation and then we realize they didn't map out any other processes, and they're almost like in a standstill. They don't know how to move forward during that design phase. So we find that we have to go back and and document all the processes so that we understand how they're doing things and how the new system will affect their future state. So that's very, very important to know. So continuing on with people and process, we have found that clear communication is crucial to the organization. People naturally feel that technology is replacing them, and then everyone becomes defensive and the message is lost. So the reason why change management and communicating and engaging employees across the organization from day one is very important. We use what we call business readiness assessments. It's just assessing the readiness of the organization in going through an ERP initiative or the type of change that we're about to put forth in the organization. We also use focus groups and many times, and it's funny because sometimes the focus groups, they bubble up other issues that the organization may have culturally, or they voice out how they haven't had clear communication from management in the past. And so it actually bubbles up some core issues that we might be able to address before we go into this implementation from a change management perspective. It's interesting how I mentioned earlier that the percentage of organizations reporting a moderate to intense focus on change management has increased dramatically in the last few years, particularly in the last year. There has also been an increase in the use of consultants in change management. And I think in many ways, a lot of vendors now are offering change management services. But what we have found is that the services that the vendors provide is just a plan. It could be just a communication plan, and they just give it to you, and it's pretty much cookie cutter and doesn't really take into account your own culture or some of the assessments in how your company wants to communicate and what is going to be the impact directly to the company. So I think that's why a lot more companies are bringing in third-party consultants.
Vendors are good at putting in the system, designing the system, just not good at making people use the system. And that's a lot of where the change management activities come into play.
Yeah, and this is just a chart showing the different change management activities. Now, a lot of people are often shocked by the amount of activities that are included in a change management plan or strategy. Coaching plans, feedback loops, and resistance management are important aspects of change management strategy. So it's interesting how very little attention is paid to that. A lot of the reasons why organizations don't quickly realize their key benefits is because the organization is slow to adapt the system. I'll tell you a quick little story about one of our clients, and this is more of a digital transformation in the sense that, they were used to doing everything paper files, paper clipboards, everything was paper, and they literally went to this paperless environment. It was almost like mutiny. Everybody wanted to go and hog the paper. The COO had to lock up the paper in the copy room so that people can try to adopt the system, but that actually slowed down the implementation of their new system, and it caused a lot of organizational issues, and it made it kind of ugly organizationally. So these change management activities are here for a reason, and they're here to help big initiatives like ERP or digital transformations go well.
All right, and from a implementation result viewpoint and standpoint here, what we're looking for, obviously every company is looking for benefits realization and ROI from their software. We do see that you really do need a business case and you do need a benefits realization plan. All too often, this happens with some of the smaller groups that we work with. They think a basic implementation is going to just all of a sudden relieve all of their pain, and they're going to obviously get a ton of payback from the system. It's not always the case. So you really need to go into it with a plan of what benefits that you think that you're going to realize. Have that documented, and also, consistently reference that business case throughout the implementation. We commonly see one of the biggest benefits that the clients receive of implementing a new ERP system is the access to information and the accessibility to sharing that information as well. So again, you have to have a plan for this. Just because you have access to information doesn't mean you're going to make the right decisions when you have all of that data. We look at reasons for budget overruns, and again, these are reasons why companies are taking longer to implement and going over from a cost standpoint. And you can see that here that the two largest on the left-hand side was the initial project scope was expanded and organizational issues. So again, from a change management standpoint, a strategic alignment. We talked about having the organization aligned from people, process, and technology. These are these first two examples coming into play here of why people are going over. And then you look at two of the other major contributing factors is, the project staffing was underestimated, and then many technical issues occurred. So technical issues during, either setup and configuration, or when you do your conference room pilots and you're starting to, flip the switch to go live. Many people are experiencing, things that popped up they didn't anticipate here that ultimately bring your budget, overboard. I think what we commonly see in all of our clients are very, very hesitant to jump into these projects before they know what their true internal resource allocation is going to be. So as we're going through our software selections, we're working with each of the vendors diligently to really anticipate and set expectations of what our clients' internal resource allocation is going to be, from a core team member to a subject matter expert to a functional lead. Everybody's going to have varying input and time dedication throughout the phases. So that's one thing that is really important to help define going into these projects. Some other reasons for timeline overruns. So this is not necessarily budget busting, but these things are expanding the time, which ultimately is going to expand the cost. But you can see far and away here is the organizational issues. So what we experience all too often is once we get into the design phase, if people haven't properly done their requirements gathering, their process management definition of what the future state is going to look like, all of a sudden the vendor is asking them to make decisions on what their processes need to look like. What that flushes up to ultimately is organizational issues. So, from the top down, who's got the authority to make these decisions that are ultimately going to change processes, change the way you implement software, and then how quickly can those decisions be made. You can see here other reasons, data issues, the scope was expanded. Again, these are things that, groups like us help reduce and mitigate this risk. And then you can see resource constraints as well. We often see that. It was interesting to see only 17% there as a timeline overrun reason. All right, so now implementation results. Of course, number one lessons learned from organization projects. Here, the employee adoption really just determines everything from a successful standpoint of an ERP and initiative here. What we do right from the get-go is we have most of the employees their voices being heard, whether it's through requirements gathering, process maps, organizational readiness assessments. We do get employee input at all different levels right from the beginning. We make sure those voices are heard in future state definitions. We also make sure that the right amount of people are actually involved in making the demo scripts, compiling those demo scenarios, and then going through the demonstration itself. So it's very important for all those end users to have their opinion, have their basically scores documented on what they think of each of the software. And as importantly, you know, when we come to our recommendation phase of our projects, you know, usually most people are on the same page, but we do have divided camps often. So we are giving data and providing data, facts on why your organization is choosing this software, why Panorama may be recommending this particular vendor, but we also give the same reasons on why we are not choosing a certain vendor. So at that point in time, those type of people, they say, you know what, my voice was heard, and now I understand why we may have not chosen the particular vendor that maybe I like, but I am on board, you know, for all these other reasons on why we've chosen this vendors.
Yeah, and one thing that we always talk about too is executive alignment or executive buy-in. So it's very important also for the executives to lead by example and being involved and being aligned with this initiative, because no matter how much help you have from externally, the executive in your organization has to be the one really driving these initiatives. And we coach the executives as well, and how to communicate and how to provide that alignment across the organization. So we've talked a lot about the importance of ERP consultants, and some of the statistics that came up. We did notice that 78% of organizations in our study are actually using some type of consultant to assist with their ERP projects. You know, some of the benefits are ERP consultants typically supplement some skill gaps in your organization, so it helps fill in the gaps. It also helps in providing some leadership. And, you know, oftentimes when we're leading organizations, you know, we kind of live in our own environment. And so consultants bring that external best practice eye to make sure that, you know, you're kind of in line or ahead of the industry benchmarks. Consultants also have the advantage of previous project experience, and that's also very important because it will keep projects on board. They will be able to see issues before they arise and be able to keep everything on budget and on time. And then, you know, they're obviously going to provide an unbiased point of view. They're not typically, or I would say technically, part of the organization. So a lot of the politics of an organization is not really going to affect the point of view of an outside consultant. You know, it's just easier to facilitate that organizational alignment and achievement of those strategic goals. I'm a career COO. I'm not a career consultant, so I can speak from experience that the beginning of my career, I did not like using consultants, but actually that made my life a little bit more difficult. So when we did bring outside consultants to help us, it was a lot easier to get all the different business units in alignment without being protective of each of their departments. So it's very interesting to see how external consultants help these initiatives go along much quicker without the politics, the bias, and some of that internal drama that we see often in our organizations.
All right, and transitioning from a new system, from an old system, to a new modern system, has obviously its challenges, and certainly requires more of an intense focus on change management. Again, from all the terms and items that we've discussed today, none of it's going to be successful if you don't properly change the organization and set expectations of how they're going to be using the system. You can look at the second bullet point here. It talks about the awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and then reinforcement. So the ADKAR type methodology certainly comes into play. And by putting a focus on this, it does show the organization that you are certainly serious with this project, and shows the importance of getting an ERP selected and implemented properly. We want it done once, and we only really want to do it ever once. If we have to do it again, hopefully down the many years down the road, we've got a good problem because of growth and complexity. But that focus on change management will certainly increase the successfulness of an implementation. All right, so thanks again for joining us today. Our report is available for download on the website, panoramaconsulting.com. Again, we appreciate all the respondents to this year's report, and appreciate all the insights and whatnot from our team that we have seen gone into this. And certainly, describing real client experiences from a point of view, as Vanessa had mentioned, from a COO, and then also from a consulting standpoint. Hopefully you've seen some of those things come out in our report and in our discussion today. And to qualify for that free hour of consulting with one of our teammates, please go to the website, and you can see here, enter the code where applicable about free hour, and we'll certainly be quick to respond to that and set you up with one of our subject matter experts. We've got Laura Florence is our Director of Business Development. Have her information here, so feel free to reach out to her at any point in time. Make sure to capture that, and we'll take a couple of questions now.
So here's one question, Chris. We have a question says, what happens if I have a CRM implementation but it doesn't work properly?
Yes, and that's a great question. We often see CRM as kind of a standalone. Maybe some people have bought one or two seats, but we commonly see CRM, not implemented properly. All too often, our clients and the groups that we're working with will go set up CRM without any, milestones in their pipeline, without knowing how to really define the contact, the contact management and the customer relationship management strategy. So, yeah, we often see it implemented as a standalone. We often see it, improperly or under implemented in its functionality. Now, when you're looking at selecting new software, you do want to assess what CRM capability is kind of out of the box, and then what CRM capabilities could they have possibly as an integrated or a third-party solution. My viewpoint is CRM sales and marketing is just an important operation to an organization. In my viewpoint, I do like to see those things defined and implemented, in the initial projects.
The other one is, do you think there's a difference in approach in change management with regards to agile projects versus waterfall projects?
Yeah, and I think with the agile is kind of a methodology of let me do a couple of things, let me get some response, and let me get a feel for how we're doing, and then let me adjust. Sometimes I guess that kind of drags out possibly a little bit more, because maybe you don't get the exact feedback loop necessary. When you see waterfall projects, I think there's more dependencies on getting one area up, and then having that that second area of functionality be dependent upon the first being successful. So yeah, I think we kind of go back, and there's certainly differences in the approach that you take. I think overall, the end means is going to be there for change management, as you need to take the proper steps to assess the readiness of an organization, assess the communication style, and assess the kind of the current feel of where the project stands and what the vision looks like.
And then we have this question, which is relevant with the coronavirus, how to do effective change management when people are working remotely. So, the way even Panorama recently had to institute a work from home policy, and I think it's really important to communicate. Have more meetings than you're used to. It could be really, really quick meetings, like 15 minutes a day with your core team. I think from IT perspective is being able to train employees on how to communicate using all the virtual tools that you have at your disposal, and leverage technology to kind of create that human contact in the absence of being face-to-face. So I think that deploying change management is principles here. You got communication, training, and constant loop feedback with the whole team. And do we have time for any more questions? I guess we have one more. How to budget for resources for an ERP implementation? Is there a rule of thumb?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and certainly depending on, you know, the scope and scale of an organization, there are some general rules of thumb, you know, out there kind of per industry. Usually when you're buying you know, a certain amount of software, you can, there are some standard ratios that historically, you know, kind of lined up with implementation. So let's just say a general rule of thumb there is a 1 to 3 type software to service ratio. Usually we've seen a 1 to 4 type ratio of software cost to service costs in more of manufacturing, because manufacturing environments tend to be a little bit more complex. But yeah, certainly we are seeing, you know, at least a 2 to 1 spend on services compared to software dollars. What that means is if, in theory, if you're spending $100,000 in software licensing, that rule of thumb is going to say it's going to take $200,000 to $300,000 to implement that. Maybe if you're a manufacturer, it may take a little bit more of that because of complexity. But yeah, there are certainly some metrics out there. There are KPIs that our Panorama team has developed over the years. We've also worked with groups like Gartner and IDC to establish some of those metrics on a per user, per month basis as well. So good question there.
Well, thank you all for your time today. If you have any more questions, feel free to send them to us. Where do we usually receive any follow-up webinar questions? Is that
yeah, if there are any other follow-up questions, you can send them to the link provided here, Laura Florence's email, or I believe you'll be able to still submit online as well. So again, appreciate everybody joining today, and thanks for everyone who did participate in providing that survey data in order to help us create the ERP report. Thank you all.